Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Washington County Public Affairs Forum on October 17th. We have a wonderful program today. Just a few announcements as we get started. First of all, thank you again to the serving staff here. You guys are just great at how you manage to get people what they order, or mostly what they order, but you do it so quietly. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And also for those of you that missed the how to use the microphone announcement, give me a moment and please give some recognition and applause to a wonderful volunteer. We have Joseph Tyner over there keeping us live. And with our budget, our staff of employees, that, by the way, just to make that clear, that's zero. We're all volunteers. We really, really appreciate the efforts of our board and our volunteers. So today we're going to take a look at Congressional District number 1. And before we take a really good look at the folks that are competing for it now, I'd like to, with pleasure, recognize the presence of our second vice president who has held the position before. Would Congresswoman first please stand? Thank you. Thank you for being here. I expect any questions that the Congresswoman would have for our candidates today would be every bit as respectful as every other questioner, reminding you that in order to ask questions of our candidates, you need to be a paid-up member of the forum. For those of you that haven't and you need to get a question in and you need to pay right away, please feel free to find me or any other board member. We're happy to help you out with that problem. Ladies and gentlemen, we're looking at Congressional District number 1. There was a toss of a coin to see who goes first. We have our two candidates, Brian Heinrich here, and we also have Congresswoman, the incumbent Congresswoman Bonamici. And with that coin toss, may I present Congresswoman Bonamici.
Thank you very much, Rob, and thank you so much to the Washington County Public Affairs Forum for having me back again. Great to see all of you. It is really my honor to be here today, and I also want to thank Brian Heinrich for showing up today and for engaging in this debate. And I want to assure you that even though Brian and I may differ on policy positions, I expect that this will be a completely respectful debate. So thank you again for coming. It's been my honor for the past 4.5 years to represent you in the United States House of Representatives. I got my start in government as a parent. My kids went through the Beaverton schools, and I care greatly about public education, and I spent some time standing down on the steps in Salem, waving Save Our School signs. My path there, though, began at Lane Community College, where I worked my way through community college, and law school, working at legal aid. And when you help low-income people, you quickly realize people don't struggle by choice. And that was a really meaningful experience for me. After law school, I worked at the Federal Trade Commission in Washington, D.C., doing consumer protection work. And then after my kids got through school, I worked as your representative in Salem, first in the House and then in the Senate. And again, it's been my honor to be a representative in Congress over the last 4.5 years when I travel around this district, which you likely know includes Washington County, Clatsop, Columbia, Yamhill, and part of Multnomah County. I hear a lot of similar concerns from people. They're feeling insecure about whether they can afford for their kids to go to college or save for retirement. And they care a lot about education and how we grow the economy and things like climate change. So I've worked hard as your representative in the United States House to build relationships. And when I was in Salem, I served in the majority. Now my whole time in Congress, I've been in the minority. But the way I've looked at it over these 4.5 years is my constituents elected me to get things done for them, regardless of whether I'm in the majority or the minority. So I built those relationships. I got a spot on the Education and Workforce Committee, helped pass the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act to streamline some of our, I see Jaime nodding, some of our job training programs, and then last year, served on the committee and the conference committee to rewrite and leave behind No Child Left Behind. I'm very proud of that work because public education is so important to our communities, and this gives more decisions back to our state and local leaders and focuses more on well-rounded education. I also helped pass the Older Americans Act, an important piece of legislation that funds critical programs like Meals on Wheels, Senior centers, we got some very important elder abuse prevention provisions in there. And I worked really hard on that. I have a friend on the other side of the aisle, and every time I saw her, she'd say, "You want to do the Older Americans Act?" I know. And we got that signed into law by President Obama. And I want to continue working on your behalf, and that's why I'd be honored to earn your support. When you fill out your ballot, which will be mailed later this week, there's still, even though I've been able to accomplish several things, there's still a lot left to be done, including the cost of higher education. We need to make college more accessible and more affordable. I have some bipartisan legislation that takes some steps in the right direction there. I want to get those passed. I want to help our coastal communities by getting my tsunami warning bill signed into law. And finally, address that critical issue of climate change. Now, many of you know that the Science Committee currently has a majority of people who do not believe that humans contribute to climate change. Yes, that is the Science Committee. But the good news is there's a bipartisan climate solutions caucus now that's coming together to address the threats to climate change, which I hear about when I'm down in Yamhill County with our agriculture community, when I'm on the coastal, in the coastal community, and when I think about things like our outdoor recreation industry. It's so important. So I've been building relationships, getting things done, and again, would be honored to earn your support when you fill out your ballot, and look forward to your questions, which I know are coming up soon. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here and for what I know will be a lively discussion when you have your questions. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you very, very much. And I forgot to say, the format, up to 5 minutes for opening statements, then we'll have questions. When we ask questions, you'll have 1 minute to ask your question, because I know there's going to be a lot of questions. We have to manage it as best as we can. And each candidate will have up to 2 minutes to answer. Please make it clear who you're asking, if you're asking both candidates or just one. And there'll also be a 1 minute opportunity for rebuttal. I'll remind you about all that in just a moment. But right now, ladies and gentlemen, Brian Heinrich.
I think we've got to get in the zone. Hold on 1 second here. I had a lovely 7-minute speech done up, and then I was informed we have 5 minutes. So if I look a little disorganized, that's why. So a little bit about me. My name is, well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I appreciate the invitation. My name is Brian Heinrich. I am a fifth generation resident of Washington County. Currently now live down in Yamhill County, but was born in Hillsboro. My great-great-grandfather farmsteaded out in the Cornelius-Shefflin area, if you guys are familiar. Just down the street from the old original Zion Church on Zion Church Road. I was raised in the Hillsboro public school system, graduated from Glencoe High School in 1993. Went on to Oregon State for a couple of terms, and then ultimately got accepted to the Walt Disney World College program, moved down for Florida for a brief period, then came back to Oregon, went to Portland Community College, and just got a 2-year associate's degree. When I was 15 years old, I started working for a company in North Portland called DSU, Peterbilt and GMC, also known as Diesel Service Unit. I started working there, 15, washing trucks, driving semis around, and doing that kind of fun stuff that other 15-year-olds get to do. Worked there during the summers, on weekends, and anytime I got an opportunity when I was in school. When I turned 21, they offered me a job in sales. I think I was probably one of the youngest salespeople they ever hired. I've been doing that ever since, so I've worked for the same company for 25 years. Let's see. I had so much to go on, and I feel a little bit lost. A lot of people ask me while I'm running. A lot of my customers have asked me while I'm running. They said, "Why would you ever want to get into some terrible industry like that?" And I have to agree with them. The more I've become educated, because I've always been politically active or politically knowledgeable, but I've never been politically active. This is my first effort into politics, and it's really shocked me. You know, from a distance, you don't realize how dirty it is, but it is kind of dirty. Nothing against Suzanne here at all. She's a very, very wonderful lady, so don't take that. But just the whole industry seems to be a little more sketchy than you'd like to think we'd run for politics. But it's been an education, so I appreciate that all the same. I decided early on, when I decided to do this about 1.5 years ago, I decided to self-fund my own campaign. One of the big problems that I have with campaigns nowadays, well, for one thing, on our choices for people, I've lived here my whole life. I've voted, again, apologize to Elizabeth first and Suzanne. I voted for a Republican candidate for my whole time I've been living here, never have won. And I've always been disappointed with my choices for representative on both sides of the aisle. And I decided that I could probably do it better, and I wanted to be the candidate that I wanted to vote for. And one of the first things I wanted to do is to get the money out of politics. I didn't realize how much was there, but as you start running, you start realizing how money gets thrown around. And it shocks me that even on a state legislature level, I mean, we're talking $1 million campaigns for jobs that pay $25,000, and not even an exciting job at that. And there's something wrong with the system, and it's on both sides. I mean, you can't blame the people for being able to wanting to donate the money, but you can blame the politicians for accepting the money. Ultimately, the reason why the House of Representatives exists is so that we have a voice in Congress. So every one of us, the roughly, I'm not sure what the total population is, but roughly 800,000 people in District 1, that we have a voice. And sometimes you think that voice gets covered up by all the money that gets thrown around because they take priority. So I decided to self-fund my own campaign. I held myself to a limit of $5,000. As of today, I've spent $3,201.50 on my campaign, and I'm the Republican candidate for U.S. Congress in District 1. My competitor, who is doing nothing different than all the other U.S. representatives out there, accepts money, and as of the most recent FEC report that I can see, she's raised around a little less than $800,000 as of the end of June. With that kind of money comes obligations, whether it's assumed or not assumed. There's things that go on. I sell things all my life, and there's obligations that come with money. So, anyway, I'm trying to be the guy that I want to vote for. Like I said, my 7-minute speech was perfect. If you could have heard it, I was practicing in my truck. It was amazing.
We believe you.
Thank you, thank you. You know, other than that, Suzanne and I both agree about the same things. I mean, as far as our policies go, I mean, I want a healthy economy. I want to strengthen education. Well, we have one disagreement on reproductive rights, but I'll take that on. If somebody would like to ask me a question on that later on, I'd be happy to answer. Confronting climate change. It's all how we do it, though. Healthy economy. I mean, you can't mandate a healthy economy, and you can't tax yourself into a healthy economy. You create a healthy economy by lowering taxes, by taking away regulations, by letting people exercise their own self-interest, so they can grow business, so they can create jobs and create the goods and services that we don't know we want yet. So, being told to close now, I would love to get into these topics, so I would entertain all the questions you got. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thanks for understanding about 7 minutes and 5 minutes. I'm sorry about that confusion. However, I would note that each candidate will have 2 minutes to close at the end of this, and perhaps we'll get a chance to hear the 2 minutes that you missed. And as our questioners line up, again, I promised you I would remind you, you need to be a paid-up member of the forum to ask questions, but you know, we're pretty good about taking your money. So, I believe the mic is live. And again, when you ask your questions, please identify whom you are asking the question of, if it's both or just one, and we'll take it from here. Bill, I think you're live. Go for it.
I'm Bill Kroger, forum member. Thanks for both of you for coming. I appreciate it very much. And Suzanne, for you taking time out of your busy day. I think since the third year of Obama's presidency, there's been total gridlock in the Congress. And over time, even though our country's pretty resilient, over time, things are beginning to deteriorate and get into problems. You know, I have to follow military things quite a bit, and I can see where the military's suffering and having some problems. My concern with the election is what happens after the election is over. You know, the polls are correct. You know, we have a good chance that Hillary Clinton's going to be our president. And if the Senate doesn't turn, you know, it's going to be just total gridlock again. They're going to do everything they can to thwart her. And so my question is what can you as a member of Congress do to help maybe get things going again and to get rid of this gridlock problem?
Which one is that directed at?
You want to go first?
I can if you want.
Sure. And I'll follow.
So the question being, how can we prevent gridlock if we have polarized government? Well, one of the things that I like to say about myself is I've been in sales my whole life. And one of the things about being in sales is you realize you try to find common ground. You try to sell benefits, diminish diminish the things that don't make positive outcomes. So I think as far as my talent there goes, I'll be extremely successful in getting people to go along with comparable ideas. But your question on gridlock, I think, is an important one. Our government was established so that it took a majority, and even in some cases a true majority or a supermajority, in order to pass legislation. And we have checks and balances between the House and the Senate and ultimately the President. And I think it's important to realize that having gridlock is not necessarily a bad thing, because evidently there's a lot of people that have disagreements. And if we have disagreements on laws, then that means maybe those are bad laws. Maybe we need to start looking at making some laws that are more palatable to all sides. You know, it was funny because I got an email or a Facebook post today from a friend of mine, which showed the voting habits of the House and the Senate in terms of party affiliation. And it's amazing, you know, we always have party differences. I mean, that's why we have a two-party system. But it was amazing to me how you saw some commonality back throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s. This was all done as kind of a changing chart. And then you start seeing the polarities occur more into like the late mid-90s and then forward. And it just tells me that we're not finding common ground, and I don't know, maybe we need a cleaning of the House. I mean, maybe that's why people like me are running, because we want to see some change.
Thank you for the question, Bill, and it's an important one. There is definitely a perception across the country that there's a lot of gridlock in Congress, and the 2013 government shutdown didn't help with that at all. But my approach has been, since I arrived in Congress in the beginning of 2012, to build relationships, to find common ground, and Brian used that term as well, and to get things done. I mentioned when I was in the state legislature, I served in the majority. Now I'm in the minority. When I first joined Congress, the Democrats controlled the Senate, the Republicans the House, and of course under President Obama. And I just moved right along and found places where I agreed with people. I made a commitment from day one that I would not, when I speak about legislation, bash a party or a person, but rather focus on the policy. Not all my colleagues do that, but I believe in respectful disagreement. And then for the past 2 years, as you know, President Obama has been president, but both the House and the Senate have been under Republican control. That didn't stop me from getting things done. That's when we did the Every Student Succeeds Act. That's when we did the Older Americans Act. We even got additional funding for the Older Americans Act program. It took a lot of work and a lot of persistence and a lot of building those relationships. In fact, I was just on a trip with a couple of bipartisan delegation and a couple of Republicans. I was having breakfast with them, and they said, you know, you're always over on our side of the floor talking to Republicans. And I said, of course, because that's how you build the relationships. So you find those commonalities and you set aside your differences. I've even worked with some of the Freedom Caucus members, the very, very conservative members, both on the Education Committee and on the Science Committee. And do I agree with them about much? No, but I found things to work in common. Do I agree with every Democrat about everything? Absolutely not. So it's building those relationships, but I also want to emphasize that there is a perception, I think, that we don't get things done when oftentimes we do. With all due respect to the media, which is important, they don't cover things like members of Congress are getting along today. They like conflict, and so you see the stories about the conflict, but not necessarily the stories about, people like me who keep our head down and keep working on the policy. So thank you for your question, Doug.
Harry Bodine, floor member. Let's stand close to the machine here. Both Medicare and Social Security are fiscal train wrecks on the way to hitting the iceberg. Total collapse coming forecast. Neither party's doing anything about it. And so what would your solution to be to start working on this? And Suzanne, excuse me, if the Trumpian implosion continues, it's possible that you're going to be in the majority in January. What would it mean to the first district of you personally if you were on the majority in the U.S. House that's different from now?
Thank you for your question, Harry. It's an important one, and as someone who's spent a lot of time recently taking care of my 88-year-old mother, I certainly understand the importance of Social Security and Medicare, which I call earned benefits. Some people call them entitlements. These are earned benefits. They're benefits that people have paid into throughout their lives and career, and we need to do everything we can to strengthen them. Medicare, of course, needs to be simplified. Believe me, I've had personal experience with this lately, but we have to make sure that it is there for our seniors. You know, a lot of people in Oregon have Medicare Advantage. I'm seeing more and more providers saying they only want a certain kind of Medicare Advantage. We have to make this system work better, and we can. The resources are there. It's a matter of priorities and simplifying some of those programs. Social Security, the same thing. We could raise the cap, and Social Security would be sound for years. So we need to have the political will to do that. You know, right now people stop paying into Social Security when they reach about $118,000 a year. We can raise the cap and give Social Security more years of soundness in that system. And what does it mean to me? What would it mean to me to be in the majority? Well, first of all, after serving in the majority, I know it's a lot more responsibility, and I would accept that responsibility gratefully and with humility. And especially, I am the top Democrat on the Environment Subcommittee and the Science Committee. I also have a couple of committees I'm on in the Education Committee, and I would be honored to serve regardless of whether I'm in the majority or minority. But in the majority, we could actually be bringing forth policies that make a difference in the lives of everyday Americans, and things like our workforce policies that have not kept pace with our changing workforce. We are the only industrialized country that doesn't offer paid leave when a child is born. So there's a lot that we could be doing to help people with that security that they need. But again, I will fight to protect Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Thank you for your question.
Very good question, Harry. I share Suzanne, my dad just started taking Social Security here about a year ago. I get my statement, I think I don't know if it's every year when you get your statement, but the last one said that it will be out of funds when I turn about 58 or 59, so thank you. I'm not a fan, I shouldn't say I'm not a fan. My campaign manager and I were just discussing this, the 9 most scariest words that you'll ever hear in your life. I'm with the government and I'm here to help. And ultimately it's true. You look at the Social Security system, and it was founded incorrectly. It was founded essentially as a Ponzi scheme with the idea that we pay forward to the people who are retiring. So it's not self-funding. Not only that, but it doesn't make a return. The money is held in the general fund, and ultimately, if we had the option of taking the 12.4% that essentially we pay through decreased incomes and taxation, because ultimately if they didn't take it from our businesses that employ us, that would ultimately come to us in wages, and we could choose how to spend it or save it at will. But the government chooses to take it, withhold it from us, with the idea that they're safekeeping it for us because they know how to help us better than we do. I put money in a 401k. I put about, I think, 7-8% in there. My return on my 401k will be substantially more than what I will ever get in Social Security, with or without the cap. And the idea of raising the cap because we need to take care of the wealthy and we need to make sure that we fleece them of their money is wrong. They're going to get very little out of Social Security, so it's just a tax. That's all it is. There's no benefits to them. We need to fix the problem. And I think the best way to do it personally is to privatize it. And I think we need to take care of the older Americans who rely on it. And I think we need to look at, in the next few years, start looking at it at a point where we can start switching the generations into a different system that takes the government out of our retirement system. I also think the same thing for our Medicare system. You know, the free market works best. We always talk about healthcare and how it's overpriced. But if we actually took out the regulations and all the government expense that's involved and we got it down to just classic free market enterprise, we would have lower prices, better service, better everything. But the government has to get their hands involved, and we can go on to healthcare if somebody wants to answer that question, but there we go.
I'm not trying to.
No, that's
So I'm not trying to increase conflict here, but I'm just reminding our speakers that if anybody wants to rebut what has been said, they have up to a minute to do so.
I just thank you, Rob, for that reminder. I just want to express my deep concern and opposition to privatizing Social Security. When we look at what happened, in 2008, 2009 with the Wall Street collapse, we need a system like Social Security to make sure that the least among us are people who cannot save in a 401k can live out their lives with dignity. So I'm very much opposed to privatizing Social Security. Are there things we can do to make it work better? Absolutely. Privatization is not one of those.
What is?
Oh, I mentioned increasing the cap. That would bring more
Taking more
stability.
taxes.
Fleecing, I call it fleecing.
And did you have the minute too, Brian? Would you care to or not? It's okay.
Nothing the government does is better or cheaper than the free market. Everything they do adds costs.
That's right.
And you can say, they can congratulate themselves for passing laws and legislation that add to our everyday cost. And they can act like heroes. But ultimately, it's the free market and individual liberty that has made this country great. And the more reliance we have on government, the less liberty we will continue to have.
That's right. That's right.
Virginia Bruce, foreign member. We've heard a little bit about education, and most people think in terms of education as preparation for work. But I feel strongly that education is also creating a public education creates a common ground for all of us to understand the facts of the world and how to live in a democracy. And I see government funding being increasingly diverted to homeschool, charter schools, and privatization of education. And this worries me because we're looking at an amazingly divided country right now, and I'd like to hear both of your opinions about the role of public education in bringing us together.
We will have to agree to disagree on this one.
Good.
It's wonderful. I'm glad you asked the question.
Raise it up.
Public education is an important thing. Ultimately, we fund public education through our property taxes so that we have a workforce, when they turn 18, that is educated and prepared to help and assist in the economy. We don't want essentially burdens on society, so we all agree that we'll fund tax dollars to public education. But the public education system is failing our people. We have lower graduation rates, we have low test scores, and you look at charter schools, and it might not have the indoctrination effort that you're pushing for and the commonality, but we're trying to make people economically productive, not socially agreeable. And that means people have liberty and they can learn what they want and choose to accept what they want. It's not an indoctrination program. And choice is a great thing. Charter schools are a wonderful thing. They started out about 2 decades ago because people were frustrated with the poor quality education that we have in the public school system, especially in the urban area. I grew up in the Hillsborough Public Schools. I think they're fantastic schools. I would say the same of Beaverton. But I would not say the same of Portland Public Schools. I think there's areas where Portland is failing. And ultimately, charter schools has brought competition into the school system. And they're doing it for less money. Charter schools on average cost 70 cents for every dollar that we fund with for a public school. And they're getting better test scores, better outcomes, happier parents, happier students. How can that be wrong? Why would you ever deny people the right to what they want? That is an absolute freedom. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you, Virginia, for the question. And I am a big believer in public education, and from my time at the state legislature, understand that there have been concerns raised over the years about charter schools, particularly charter schools that don't have the structure and accountability of public education, and particularly the online charter schools is something that I've been very concerned about. My concern about privatization of education, whether it be through charter schools or in other ways, is that public education is designed to give opportunity to everyone, regardless of background, zip code, things like charter schools that serve just a fraction of the population. My responsibility as a representative is to represent 100% of the people, not the 5 or 6% whose parents think, well, maybe a charter school would be better, and very concerned about what happens when charter schools close. Yes, we should be looking at the charter schools that they were originally designed for, is to find out what really works in education and then to take those ideas and bring them to the other 97% of the students who are educated. So I've worked on a lot of charter school accountability issues, but really do believe in the public and public education. We don't necessarily fund our schools by property tax dollars anymore in Oregon. That changed almost 26 years ago with Measure 5. Our schools are funded from the state, and we also have the important federal dollars for programs like Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and those very critical Title I dollars. Title I dollars come from a program that was called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And it was formed as basically a civil rights law in the 60s because the whole idea was how do we equalize education more across the country and especially in low-income areas. So those Title I dollars are very important to go to schools with high concentrations of low-income students. So there is an important federal role, but I also wanted to mention career and technical education. The federal government, the House just passed the Career and Technical Education Bill. I know it's on the ballot here in Oregon as well. We need to make sure we have those hands-on learning opportunities for everyone, and I'll catch up on that when I have another question. There's some more time. Thanks, Rob. Thank you, Virginia.
It might be easier to get a platform. We talked about money and funding school, yet charter schools cost less on average than public schools. So they're providing the taxpayer, us, their value. Again, the students and the parents are happier. Charter schools are so popular in many urban areas that they have to have lotteries to get the children in. And the kids are disappointed when they don't get the opportunity to go. And I find it funny that we can take, and again, I'm a big fan of freedom of choice. It's a huge thing that makes our country great. And part of that goes with our freedom to choose how we educate our children. But when we don't have a choice, we're stuck in mediocrity. And that is what we're getting. We have no competition. The charter schools have to prove they're better even though they're doing better. And the public schools are considered the baseline. I think absolutely the opposite is true, and I can speak with intelligence. My sister-in-law, who actually is my volunteer campaign manager and is here today, works as a public school teacher. And we agree that there are things that can be improved, and competition helps that. Thank you.
Just briefly, I am pro-choice. The issue with choice within the public education system, look at Beaverton, for example. All these great magnet programs, but you have the accountability of a public school district. So I'm concerned about the unaccountability of many charter schools and again, serving just a fraction of the population. We need to make sure our public schools work for every student to give everyone the opportunity to go on and thrive. And I mentioned, I'm gonna just catch up on my career and technical education, that wonderful hands-on learning. I was just over at Aloha High School, their auto tech program. High schools are bringing back these hands-on learning opportunities that are so engaging for students. That plus the well-rounded education that's the focus of the new Every Student Succeeds Act is going to make a big difference in reaching the needs and educating. It's not indoctrination, it's education. Teaching our students how to think critically and be prepared regardless of what path they take in life.
Patrick Wheeler, farm member. I'd be interested to hear your ideas on how we can get drug prices down to a manageable level, especially life-saving drugs. So I'd like to hear your ideas.
Legal or illegal?
Thank you, Patrick. It's great to see you. And that's an important question about pharmaceutical pricing, and it's something that I've heard about again and again, especially with the things like the EpiPen and the Hep C medication that is such a big investment. You know, our pharmaceutical companies absolutely need to have the research dollars, and sometimes they're researching a product, but it doesn't turn out to be something that works. So they have to be able to do their research. But that being said, families are being, and people are being priced out of medication that they need. We've had many conversations in Congress about how we address this. I was a little surprised to hear that many pharmaceutical companies, not all of them, but many of them, spend more on advertising than they do on research. So we need to have a conversation about how we are able to, from the federal perspective, address drug costs. One of the things we could do is we could allow negotiation for bulk purchasing and Medicare, just like we do for veterans. That is step one. We should be able to do that. And working with the researchers, make sure that we get the research we need, but that they can drive down prices. We're looking at many different models, and I'm certainly open to your suggestions about how you would like to see this happen. It is critical for so many of my constituents. So thank you, Patrick. Great to see you.
If you didn't hear earlier, I asked if the question was for legal or illegal drugs. As far as the legal drugs go, I think one of the issues we can do to lower the cost of them is to lower the, to limit the FDA's standards on the efficacy of drugs. One of the issues, we used to be able to process drugs much more quicker through the FDA when they just checked for the safety of drugs and not necessarily the efficacy. Granted, they might not be as effective as we'd like them to be, but ultimately it also allowed drugs to hit the market sooner so that people could start using them. Ultimately, you look at the time it takes for drugs to come to market through all the testing and everything else, beyond the safety limits, but on the efficacy markets. And the costs are substantial. Not only do you have drugs that Suzanne mentioned that through the R&D cost and ultimately fail, but there's also a lot of cost for processing through the FDA. And you look at the EpiPen and other things like that, and a lot of these drug companies, especially what I would consider the non-capitalists, or maybe they are capitalists, but they're basing it on a monopoly system, and they know that they're restricted access through the FDA because they know it's going to take so much processing for a competitor to come to market. And they take advantage of that, and that's wrong. But part of that wrongness is caused by the FDA's slow processing. Again, I'm a big fan of the free market, and I really think that a lot of the problems that we have are caused more by government than by the individuals.
Well, one of the things I've already supported in Congress is the 21st Century Cures Act, and that is a meaningful investment in the National Institutes of Health, and if they're doing a lot of the basic research, that's important. But it also streamlines some of the FDA processes. Do we care about safety? Absolutely. But there are ways that we can make that process work better. There are also other pieces of legislation to streamline FDA. It's finding a bipartisan consensus that gets through both chambers that's going to be important. So I agree with Brian that yes, we could streamline the FDA in many ways. We absolutely should not and cannot compromise safety. But again, that the NIH investment is important as well. If our healthcare researchers are doing a lot of the basic research, that's a critical part as well. Thank you.
John Blackman, forum member. A famous philosopher, Mrs. Thatcher, I believe, once said the trouble with communism is that sooner or later you run out of other people's money. What are your thoughts on our national debt, which at present is a huge amount per person? I'm thinking of my grandchildren when I speak. Are you going to raise taxes? Which one? Are you going to cut spending? Which one? Thank you.
God bless you, John. One of the reasons why I'm running is because I'm extremely concerned about the national debt. People don't realize, I think, and your question was, I think it's about $60,000 per taxpayer right now.
Thank you.
It's a substantial amount. And there's no signs that the government has any effort to close that gap up. We're getting no value out of this money. It's going to bigger government, more bureaucracy, and no additional benefits to you or I as a taxpayer. And the burden is all put upon us. You ask how we cut? Well, I think the immediate thing that you do is do the job of what Congress is supposed to do, which is hold the purse strings. They control the budget. Cut it. You know, when businesses slow down, they cut budgets. They get rid of, they terminate positions, they lower their expenditures, and they balance their budgets because that's their job. That's how things continue to go on. Our government seems to think that you can just continue to borrow and put it on a Visa card, but that Visa card's being put on, and our Congress people don't seem to care because they know that they're gonna be out in another 8 to 10, or some of them are lifers, but most of them are gonna be retired in another 8 to 10 years, and they don't have to pay the bill. We do. And ultimately, if our money can't buy anything, and I tell people this all the time, you look at what happened to Germany after World War I, and they had a lot of debt to pay. And what did they do? They just printed it. And that's ultimately what we're doing with quantitative easing right now. We just print the money and act like it doesn't impact anybody, but it does. I look at what a burger at McDonald's costs, what it costs now versus just a few years ago. And you're devaluing our money, you're devaluing our respect in the world. And we've got to do something. And ultimately, you cut taxes, because if you cut taxes, you stimulate an economy and you create growth. And you turn in the money more frequently, you make more money on it. Ronald Reagan cut taxes, and for 7, I think, out of the 8 years he was president, he brought in more money than the year before. People were happier, they lived better lives. And you know what? They made more money, they donated more money to charity. It's a wonderful time. The government didn't have to act as our overseer. They actually took a secondary role, and it was a wonderful time.
Thank you for the question. I disagree with Brian when he said that we don't care about that. Absolutely. I care about this issue. In fact, I served on the budget committee for my first year in Congress. Budgets are priorities. It's who we are as a country and what we believe in and what our values are. I am always, as your representative, looking for smarter, better ways to do things. And that's one of the reasons why, for example, we gave more decisions back to the state and local leaders with education. It's one of the reasons why I frequently meet with and work with the Pacific Northwest Defense Coalition to find smarter, better ways to serve our military. Now, look at the situation, what it's been in the last several years. We had 2 extremely, extremely expensive wars and the collapse on Wall Street with 08, 09. Those are incredibly difficult times for our country. And people were really hurt by those times. But when I look at things like the defense budget, there are a lot of places we could cut the defense budget and still have a very safe country and a very strong military. In fact, when I was on the budget committee, one of the first people who came to testify was then Secretary Panetta. You know where we need investment? Cybersecurity and intelligence. You know where we don't need investment? A lot of the big military hardware. And those things get put into the budget by people whose districts contain the companies that make those weapons. I don't agree with that at all. We, again, can have a smart, safe military budget and still make a lot of cuts. And again, the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, another example. We're finding smarter, better ways to do things. So we have a disagreement about this issue because, first of all, I care greatly, but I also see a role of government in many of these places. And with regard to taxes, our tax code needs to be progressive, not regressive. We need to make sure that people who are able to pay are paying their share, but low-income people are not strapped with additional tax burdens. Out of time, thank you.
I find it ironic that somebody who accepts money from the political action committees, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, wants to cut our military, but that's just a thought. It needs to be done on a line item basis. You can't just say we need to cut military. That's very short-sighted. There's a very expensive, large budget out there. We spend $1 trillion a year between state and federal governments trying to end the war on poverty that was created during the Johnson administration. And we have done very little to move that peg from anywhere when it was during the Johnson administration. So I think maybe there's some social programs that could be looking at cuts, and I don't think it would impact. You could consolidate, you can lower costs, but you need to do line item budget cutting. We don't just need to sit there and say, just add 3%, because I know in my business, if we could add 3% every year, we'd be thrilled.
Well, I certainly agree with Brian's earlier comments about the need for campaign finance reform. Absolutely. I've worked with companies like Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman because I'm a hardworking member of the Science Committee, and we work on a lot of issues dealing with research and technology. In fact, a representative from Lockheed Martin came and spoke at one of my STEM to STEAM caucus meetings because they really believe in the change, integrating arts and design into education so we have an innovative workforce. Despite those campaign contributions, I have never once voted for the defense budget because it's too bloated.
Elizabeth Burris, forum member. This has been very interesting. I'm confused though, because I've heard one of the speakers say that he's anti-choice, and yet he's pro-choice. I've heard.
Excuse me, I did not say.
Excuse me.
I asked for somebody to ask me the question so I could get involved. Would you like to ask the question?
No, thank you.
Then I'd ask somebody else.
Go ahead.
So don't be putting words in my mouth. That's not respectful.
I'm concerned and would like to ask the Congresswoman, because I've sat in her seat, walked in her shoes, what do you think is the greatest issue for, and it's such a diverse district, obviously, it's not like representing New York. What do you think in the first district we need to address first and foremost?
Thank you, Congresswoman, and it's an honor to sit in the seat in a district that you once served. The most important issue, it's hard to pin it down to one, but if I had to pick one word, it would be security, economic security, financial security. How do we make sure that people who are now worried about the future, how can we make sure that we're bringing back some of that security? And that could be through things like retirement security, through building our economy by robust investments in transportation and infrastructure, and also the security of the planet. When I'm down in Yamhill County talking with the people who work in the wine industry, which has done a lot for the economy of this region and the state, they're worried about the security of the industry because as temperatures warm, they're looking at California where there's been drought, they're very concerned about that. So I would say security, which gets to economic security, financial security, and the security of a safe planet and clean planet. So those are some of the ways that I would address that critical issue.
Do I have a moment to rebut that?
Yes.
I believe it was Benjamin Franklin who said, "Those who choose security over liberty will get neither." That's what makes it dynamic. I mean, if we want security, that's what socialism is. Socialism is secure. It guarantees poverty, but the nice thing is we're all in poverty, so it works well. It's worked well for the Soviet Union for several years. During the 1980s, the average income of a Soviet was below the poverty level of anyone in the United States.
Could I ask?
You to answer the question.
Yeah.
Let's repeat the question.
The question what is the most important issue facing the 1st Congressional District, which is extremely diverse, as I'm sure you've
I
studied.
know I'm very well, because I think it was you took over for Lessa Coyne, and shortly after he left, the district was first gerrymandered to allow the Democrats to win pretty decisively. And I always said, if you have a diverse district, it just tells you that's gerrymandered, as far as I'm concerned, unless you're dealing with a very small population.
Could you answer the question?
15 seconds left. Go for it.
What is
Most important issue.
the national debt is absolutely the most important issue of the 1st District and everyone in this nation. Because if we do not correct this, we are on a crash course for economic collapse. You want economic security, it starts with the national debt.
Thanks.
I do have some knowledge about the national debt. When President Clinton left the Congress, we had reduced the national debt to 0. When Mr. Bush left the presidency, it was back up at $300
And
million.
Obama doubled it, and Obama doubled it in his administration. So don't pick parties.
Thank you. Next questioner, please.
President Reagan tripled the
Kate,
national debt.
Kate, please, next question.
Paula McCracken, first one check.
I'm now a member.
Yes. This week, I'm in the business of an intermodal trucking firm, and this week we found out that Owens Corning, it's Owens, but part of the Owens Corning development is closing their warehouse and leaving. In order to accommodate that business, we have given 6 drivers trucks and all of the other things that go along with it to service them. With them closing, there are at least 6 drivers that probably will be laid off, to say nothing of all of the people that are being laid off at Owens. How would you handle that when a business says, why do we want to stay in Oregon? And in complex situations, Measure 97 is going to be another whack. One of our divisions is a C class. So if you could address 97 and how are we doing with all the layoffs, the port, how do we get through these units? I don't even hear anybody talking about that. Thank you.
Well, certainly as a former state legislator, I understand the need for revenue for education and healthcare. I am not weighing in on whether endorsing or opposing Measure 97. I'm just encouraging people to look at the facts of that, because after looking at the amount of money that's being spent on both sides and the messages, I really want people to take a close look. Understanding that we need the revenue, we need to do it in a way that is good for Oregon. So with regard to things like the port issue and whether a company goes out of business, we need to make sure that we have the transportation infrastructure and the jobs here for everyone. I've been supportive of workforce training for people when there's an industry that changes, either because of globalization or for other reasons, to make sure that those job training opportunities are available. We used to be a timber-dependent state, for example. We are no longer a timber-dependent state. I'm excited about things like cross-laminated timber, which is a great opportunity to start bringing back some of that industry. So we need to make sure that we have a good education system, good roads and bridges, and a good tax structure that supports the things that we need in our state.
Brian.
I'm very passionate about Measure 97. It impacts my company greatly to the point that it will probably put us out of business. We sell trucks, and we sell a lot of trucks, and trucks are an expensive price point. We last year, through all the businesses that the issue did, the sales in Oregon, totaled about $153 million. On that, we made a gross profit of about $500,000, of which the government took $250,000 in taxes. Actually, slightly more, because we made less than the government did on our business. If Measure 97 passes, we will have to pay an additional $3.2 million to the state of Oregon. That means that we will have to raise prices. We don't have $3.2 million to pull out of our assets. The products we sell are able to be purchased in any state. We service the state of Oregon and the state of the southern portion of Washington. But on my side, I sell GMC products. Okay, so we can buy those here or across the river. So what we're saying here, and a 2.5% tax is a pretty substantial tax, and it's a sales tax. Don't lie to yourselves. It's a sales tax. It's not an income tax. So ultimately, somebody can go across the river 4 miles and buy the same product from us or from a competitor, and they will pay 2.5% less than they can pay from us. And when we're holding an average margin of about 4% on the vehicles, it means there's nothing left to give. And so ultimately, if you pass this, you are destined to lose jobs, you are destined to lose economic growth. You think this tax is going to raise revenue, it'll truly lose revenue. Businesses will not move here, we're going to lose growth. We're going to have more people on unemployment. We already have we have 25% of the population already on some type of government subsidy in the state. It will only get worse if Measure 97 passes. And it doesn't go to just, they always say, oh, it goes to education and healthcare. It's there to solve the PERS problem, which our state legislature fails to fix. That's the problem. And it wouldn't be so fine if we had to pay it a little bit if we knew the fix was coming, but it's not.
Did you? Okay, no rebuttal. I'm very sorry to have disappointed 3 or 4 questioners, but we are so close to the end of our time, and I did promise each candidate 2 minutes to close. So as a result, and I do believe, would you like to go first again?
Well, I went first at the beginning.
Yes, so I think, okay, great. Then, ladies and gentlemen, we're into our closing moments, and Brian, please.
As you can probably tell, I'm not a politician. I never have been. This is the first time. It's in education. I'm very passionate about my views. I'm very passionate about freedom and liberty. I'm very passionate about this country. I think this country is the greatest country on earth. And I'm proud to be an American, and I want to continue to be proud to be an American. And I'd like people to be able to exercise their liberties in all facets of their life. I believe in the opportunity to choose, even though some person recently said that I contradicted myself. I did not, but nobody asked me the question on abortion. If you like, you can ask me after the meeting. But I think we need a change in our government. It's going down a very bad path. We're spending money we don't have. We're constantly have massive amounts of corruption, unethical behavior. And we just consider this, when people ask me, they just say, well, that's just politics. And I don't think that's true. I think we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard. We're Americans, for Pete's sake. We're better than everybody else. And we should start acting like it in our government as well as in our daily lives. Thank you.
Thank you again to the Washington County Public Affairs Forum for this opportunity for this engaging and lively debate. It has been an honor over the past 4.5 years to represent you in the United States House of Representatives. I have spent my entire adult career standing up for families, for children, for education, for our community. I'm proud of the work that I've done. When I was in the Oregon legislature, I was able to make a big difference in the lives of Oregon families. And when the Willamette Week newspaper did their ratings of legislators, I got the highest score for integrity, and I've taken that integrity with me to the United States Congress. And even though serving in the minority now, maybe not after November, but even serving in the minority, I've been able to build relationships and make important progress on things that matter to our communities, whether it be career and technical education, well-rounded education for our students, the Older Americans Act, working on resilience issues to help our coastal communities prepare, transportation and infrastructure, where I had a part in passing a 5-year transportation bill because our roads, our bridges, our infrastructure are so important to the community. So it would be truly an honor to return as your representative, to continue the work that I've been doing. I look forward to finding more and better ways to build our economy, to make college more affordable. I have some great bipartisan legislation I'd like to see passed and signed into law that helps students in higher education. As someone who worked my way through school myself, I know how important that is. So I approach each and every day with an understanding that it is an awesome responsibility to represent Northwest Oregon in the U.S. House. It's an honor I take very seriously and commit to working hard, continuing to work hard on your behalf if I'm honored with re-election in November. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here with you today.
Thank you to both of our candidates today. I would point out that a third candidate was due to be here. He did confirm, but apparently was unable to be here. So, folks, thank you so much for the questions. I certainly hope that you guys will have a few minutes because, again, we had questioners that weren't able to get right up to the mic. So if you want to grab these people gently and carefully before you leave the restaurant, that's just great. Now next week we're going to take there is an election going on, I know you know that, and yep, next week we're going to take a good look at 3 House districts. We'll be looking at 26, 34, and 35. For those of you that aren't following us on Facebook, find us, we're not that hard. And on Twitter, it's @WC Forum, okay? So those of you that are on those social media stuff, you can't miss us. We're everywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next week. Thanks one more time to our candidates, and thank you all for being here.